He's not ready to go.
I'm sorry, I have to say this. I'm going to be positive today.
No, you're not.
But I saw a Gospel Coalition headline, and I haven't read it, but its title is congregational singing dangerous? Like virus dangerous.
I just love that you automatically think you're going to be negative when you read a Gospel Coalition headline.
I'm going to close Twitter.
Oh, welcome to Reformgelical. And on that note, the positive episode where the Reformed and Evangelicals meet. I'm the Evangelical Matt, and we have two Reformed people today. The great A.D. Robles, and we got Summer Jaeger as well.
Hi.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming on and showing up.
Yeah.
So you are a podcast host of the Sheologians that comes out weekly?
Yes, every Monday.
Yeah, and what's that about?
So my friend Joy and I, a couple years ago, Marcus Pittman, who was the producer at Apologia Studios at the time, said, hey, I think it'd be a really good idea if you guys did a podcast. And we thought that would be funny. And then all of a sudden, we had 1 million downloads. And we were like, hey, this is weird. And so we've just been trying to be faithful with it ever since. So we talk about Christian worldview and we make people upset frequently. But I hope that we encourage people more than we do anything like that. That's my hope.
Yeah, my wife's a big fan. Before like she even knew that we talked on social media and you were kind of part of the Apologia cross-politic crew. She's like, you should really listen to that Summer Jaeger. She has a great podcast and check it out. I'm like, oh, okay.
Well, bless her heart. Tell her thank you.
I definitely will.
Isn't bless your heart a curse word? That's what I heard. I'm not a Baptist, though.
I don't live in the South, so it's not because I'm in the West.
Okay. That's what I heard. Is that true, though? Yeah. Matt, you're from the East, right?
No, I'm from California. I live in the South now, but I'm still not acclimated. I still don't know the terms. Mm-hmm. I understand Spanish more than the Southern accent.
Me too.
For sure. And you also do blogging, right? Is there part of a blog aspect on that?
Yeah, so sometimes I write when I have time. I mean, I have 4 kids, so whenever I have the time to write, I enjoy doing that. I definitely don't have the time that I would like to have for that, but maybe one day. It's not a huge priority for me, but sometimes if I think something's important enough, I will take time to do that. The last time I really did that was when Rachel Hollis wrote a book, so hopefully she doesn't do that again.
I don't have the time
to
write a book.
For her to write another book.
So how do you manage 4 kids and everything else that you do?
How do I manage? I feel like Michael Scott right now. He wrote the book, Somehow I Manage, and that's how it feels. Somehow I manage. You know what? I have a lot of support. My husband's very supportive of what we're doing with homeschooling. I couldn't do it without him. I wouldn't be doing it without him. And, we just have a great church community. So thankfully with Sheologians, I'm really only out of the house occasionally. Tomorrow is a recording day for us, so I'll be in the studio for a couple hours. And other than that, I get work done in between the laundry and the schooling, and I love it that way. It works out really great for us. And I like that my kids get to see me doing something that I care about and I enjoy, and that's part of a ministry. So hopefully that's a good example to them. And we just do it all together.
Well, that's encouraging to me because I'm about to have my daughter born, and that's 2 kids that we're going to have our hands full. And I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to get anything done with just 2 kids. So knowing that you could have 4 and you can do all the things you do.
You'll be fine.
You'll be fine.
And actually, once you pass 2, like every additional kid, it's just like, it doesn't really actually add any work because you're already doing all that work. So
right.
You're fine.
Really, you have 3, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and adding the 3rd was just like, here's another one. Cool.
I wonder if Brittany agrees. I don't know.
I'll let her chime in and see. All right. So one of the things that we do in the beginning of the show is have our conspiracy theory segment. And this one is a little juicy because it involves murder.
But this one's serious, though.
Yeah, I know it is serious.
Usually they're stupid.
This one is serious. And I like this one because it kind of goes off of what we were talking about last week, AD, about how like it's good to question things, like not necessarily have the theory all played out in your head and knowing how that works. But there's like times where you could be like, yeah, that just doesn't make sense to me. And this is one of those times. A researcher on the verge of making a very significant coronavirus vaccine or flu, something kind of says finding, but I think it was a vaccine, was shot to death in his house. And there's a other murder that happened down the street, and they're tying them together.
Right. Strange. Murder, suicide. Right. That's a little funny.
Yeah. I tried to find if he's related to the Clinton campaign, but I couldn't see any.
Very, very, very mysterious. There's no question about it.
Yes. Summer, do you like conspiracy theories?
I enjoy a good conspiracy theory in its place. Yeah. I think that right now I think conspiracy theories are falling in a rough time right now because they're being utilized as a weapon against people that just aren't willing to believe everything they hear immediately. So it's like, if I question what I'm being told in any way, then I'm going to get shut down by being labeled a conspiracy theorist. So it's honestly taking the fun out of it for me because I'm not a conspiracy theorist. And obviously I think all of us would agree that we have some kind of like biblical command not to be conspiracy theorists. But it's like at this point in time, we are so supposed to believe everything the media says that if you don't, all of a sudden you're into conspiracies, and it's a strange time to talk about conspiracy.
Indeed, it's a strange time to be alive, period. Seriously.
Yeah, there's that.
I was gonna say it's taking all the fun out of it because they're all turning out to be true, and like part of the fun is the craziness of the mysterious.
The story part, the fiction part is supposed to be the fun part, and then it turns out it's not fiction. So it's like, well, that's depressing.
Right.
Yeah, this is exactly what we were talking about last week, though, Matt. Because like any kind of doubt or any kind of disbelief or any kind of like, yeah, I'm not so sure about that. Sounds crazy. Like that gets labeled a conspiracy theory. That's really not a conspiracy theory at all. Conspiracy theory is trying to like pull strings from all over the place and come up with this grand plan that they have no evidence really of. That's a conspiracy theory. But to say, that Epstein story, I don't believe that. That's not a conspiracy. That's no theory. It's just saying I don't believe that.
Yeah. It's conspiracy skepticism.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, there's no theory behind that questioning.
It becomes a theory when you say, and definitely Hillary did it. You have evidence of that.
I appreciate AD. You like definitely you see when people are being absolutely ridiculous, and then I feel like you lay it out very clearly and very quickly. And I think what you just said is exactly what the problem is that people are redefining what it means to be a conspiracy theorist to fit an agenda. And so it's like, no, if I read something that's obviously untrue, the actual like not stupid thing, the not conspiracy theorist thing to do is to question like that you just don't believe everything you read.
Yeah, I know. Seriously.
Imagine that.
Imagine.
And it's like we're in a time where we don't really have reasons to believe anything we read anymore.
It's getting harder to find them.
Seriously. Which this agenda is a good segue into your tweet, Summer. Obedience to tyranny is love for neighbor Christians everywhere. Can you elaborate on that a little bit and what you're thinking behind that?
Sure. So I think that we are seeing the fruit of really anemic teaching on what governing authorities are for scripturally. I think we're seeing the result of really a lack of teaching on spheres of authority. So could most Christians even tell you what the three spheres of authority are that God has set up for us. I think most Christians couldn't. And for that reason, I think most Christians have come to a position where they honestly have more of a unbelieving worldview as to what the role of government should be than a Christian worldview. They have read a couple verses in Romans 13. They were raised in public schools, and they've been taught that being kind is how to be a Christian. And so the thinking stops there. And honestly, if that is what you've been taught, then questioning what the government is doing is absolutely unchristian. But that's not a biblical position. And so I think a lot of Christians are very fearful right now of saying anything or questioning anything because they might be labeled unchristian. And instead of really thinking biblically about what love for neighbor is, they're just thinking like, well, how can I be obedient and nice? And I just think it's really interesting that if you are a Christian who questions whether or not government has the right to shut down churches, a lot of people are only capable of saying, well, Romans 13.
Yeah, that's for sure. And just to put everyone's mind at ease, my Bible is open to Romans 13 for this discussion.
Great.
So that's all we need to know about life is in Romans 13.
For the first time, right, Matt? You've never read that before.
No, definitely not.
Well,
I'm the evangelical.
Summer is right. I remember when I converted, it was like a year or two before I found out about the spheres of authority. And the only reason I found out about it was because of a very weird video with Chocolate Knox and Gary DeMar. And I was like, this old white guy is kind of crazy. I got to buy his book. So I bought his book, and he lays this out. I had never heard that before. And I remember when I saw it, I was kind of angry. I was like, why didn't anybody tell me this?
Dude, 80, I'm right there with you.
In that position, you know?
I didn't hear about it until a bald guy named Toby Sumter started laying it out on Cross Politic. I grew up in the church, became a Christian in my early 20s, spent every day at church for the next 3 years, not once had anything close to this, not even just using those terms, but anything close to like talking about the different roles that God has given. Not once. I can't imagine how many people who haven't heard about it. I mean, it must be something very specific to the Reformed world. That's the only guess I could make of it. Summer's looking at me skeptically for those who are listening audibly.
I had a weird experience. One time I had dinner with Gary DeMar and his wife every night for like a week once. So wow. I feel like I had a different experience than a lot of people. But no, it's true that I think a lot of it too is just that we are so spoiled. We're a generation of Christians that have never suffered persecution in any way. And we think unless we're being used as human torches that we're not really suffering in any way. And it's going to be through this command to love your neighbor that we end up losing our rights. And so what's really freaking me out right now is that a lot of Christians are doing that thing where it's like, well, this isn't really persecution.
Right. Right.
You know, and it's like, well, what's the next step, bro? And like, since when is it okay for a governor to say you can't sing and you can't have communion? And also, since when do you think that's part of their job, or you think that that's appropriate?
Right.
But again, it's the feminization of the church in a lot of ways has made it so that we're a people that we want to play nice at all costs, and it's going to cost us all in the end.
Yeah.
Wait, did you say feminization?
I did, yeah.
Aren't you a lady though?
I am, yeah.
How can you say something like that? That's an insult.
It's not wrong for me to be feminine. It's wrong for the pulpit to be feminine. And again, different spheres here. And yeah, no, it's right. I was telling my husband, you know, our pastor preached a sermon for our governor the other day this past Sunday to encourage him to do the right thing. and to stop oppressing the people under him. And, it really hit me when he was preaching that and we were leaving. I was like, the thing about me is that I would love to say that if I was going to have to lose, all of my money and all of my comforts in order to continue going to church, I want to be the kind of Christian that's willing to do that. But at the end of the day, if my elders and the men aren't willing to do that, I'm going to cave. There's no way I'm going to be able to do that. And there's no way the church is going to be able to suffer persecution if the people in the pulpit aren't willing to do that before us and lead the way for us. And so I just think that's something to think about, is how many pastors right now, and obviously the point isn't to be incorrigible and unchristian and crazy, but the point is like, are our pastors going to roll over and not meet and not give out the sacraments and not let us sing because the governor told them to?
Mm-hmm. I mean, aren't we already seeing that though with online churches?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, is it worse or better that we can meet but not have the sacraments? I mean, isn't it in effect the same thing?
Yeah, in some ways. And I mean, obviously, I think there are some people who they're thinking that this is going to end. And so it's like, okay, if we have to tell our people not to meet for a certain amount of time, and then avoid, everybody getting in trouble or people being hauled off to jail, then sure, that sounds like a wise thing to do. But I also think if that's what you think is happening, maybe you haven't been paying attention.
Right. Well, the other thing about it too is that, and I kind of said this in the very beginning, is that there's really no principled stance here. It's like, okay, so we'll tolerate 2 weeks. Oh, okay, maybe 2 months, and then what's another month, and then what's a year? You know what I mean? And then why not just have church season? So every flu season we shut it down, and then church season is between April and whatever the end of flu season is. There's no principled reason to deny that. I said that as a joke. I was trying to pretend to be serious, but how could you deny me? Don't you care about people's lives?
Right.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of no principles, actually, now we'll get to it when you get to it, Matt. You run this. You run this thing.
Okay. The one thing I was thinking about when Summer was talking about that is we all talk about just how people aren't really standing up. But I think a lot of ways, because we haven't been discipled correctly and been thinking about this correctly at all for so long, is I don't think anyone really understands where the red line is for us to make the stand in a lot of respects. And I'm talking about just the church in general. It's like, when is it overstepping? And I don't think majority of Christians, elders, pastors even, could say, this is the line. It's kind of like, we've had it so good, Summer, like you've been saying. We haven't even had to think about this. And it's been, I don't know, 100 years, 200 years since we've had this kind of persecution. I haven't had in my lifetime. So then all of a sudden it starts happening and it's like, oh, well, I need to start thinking about this. Did they already cross the line? And so it's kind of hard to make a principled stand. Maybe it's not so much cowardice as just confusion and just not having that foundation.
Yeah, I think that I know for a fact there's a lot of churches where the elders just don't agree on when is the right time to go back, when is the right time to do this, and so, I mean, I feel like there's a lesson there too in terms of who is on the elder board and who is qualified and who do you want to lead a church with. And I feel like a lot of pastors are probably behind doors figuring that out right now, and it might not be very pleasant.
Yeah. One thing that I'm encouraged by is that a lot of pastors that I know, probably between 5 and 10, that were kind of like, okay, we submit to the governor. They're starting to talk about, okay, what about regardless of what the governor says, what do we do? And that's an encouraging thing. And I think that they're already kind of setting us all up to go through this again next fall. And so I think it's going to be very interesting to see what happens now that people have had time to think about it and to talk about it and to pray about it. That's going to be interesting. And I personally think that there's a lot of reason for optimism for that. And I'm gonna be positive today.
Wow.
Yeah.
I was going to be negative and say, I think just from a historical perspective, one of the things that we really need to be worried about is when we do go back to normal, quote unquote, is how much is the government going to give back to us? And then how much is the government going to just sink in and say, okay, we're going to continue to regulate these certain interactions and these certain situations. Like the government doesn't have a good history of giving back rights.
That's a conspiracy theory, Matt.
Well, no, that's funny that you said that because that's what I was thinking. I think that a lot of people, if you hear this, you're going to think you guys are just very untrustworthy conspiracy theorists or whatever. I think history would tell us otherwise. Typically, when governments start to take rights away, they're not very quick to give them back. And, you know, people will hold up the Spanish flu in 1918 as an example. Obviously, there's a lot of parallels there that shouldn't exist because there's no parallel. The Spanish flu did not discriminate. If you had it, you probably died, whether you were healthy, sick, old, young, middle-aged. That's not what we're facing right now, not even close. And so it's interesting to see the numbers come out, and we know now that coronavirus is nowhere near as dangerous as they told us. And even if you adjust for flattening the curve and all of that, we know it's not as dangerous as we thought it was going to be. And yet here we are jailing people for opening their businesses.
I know. Even at this point, after the data has come out, and you know, those models early on factored in isolation and this social distancing. So there, I know that play is going to come where they're going to be like, oh, it's because what we did, it made it lower than it was. No, that was with shelter in place.
Right. Yeah. Well, the thing is, you can't go back on it now. So once the government said you have to do these things, they have to come down on people that don't do them, because once people realize that they can get away with not doing what you say, then you've got anarchy from their perspective. When you're not governing according to God's standards, like the only thing you know is brute force and power and violent threats. So like you can't let it slide. You know what I mean? You just can't.
No. Well, that's parenting 101, right? I mean, if you tell your kids, hey, if you do X, Y, and Z, you're in trouble, and then they do X, Y, and Z, you're forced, you have to follow through. And so since the government thinks it's our parent right now and we can't take care of ourselves, they have to follow through with what they said. And you're right about that.
Yeah. Oh, did you guys watch the Waco series on Netflix?
Yeah.
80.
Wow.
No, come on, man. I don't watch Netflix.
What? Oh, I forgot. You don't even have a smartphone, dude. You got to get with the times, man. I know.
Check it out, Summer.
It's really 2020. What is that? I don't even know what that is. Like,
Summer, that's something we had in high school.
Not me.
It's a slide phone, son.
Okay. All right. Well, good for you, man.
It's terrible. Try to get a hold of him anytime during the week. It's impossible. But in Waco, there was this one line, and I don't know if it was factual or not, because it was based on 2 books, and it's probably hearsay. But one of the things they were talking about when they had the compound surrounded and they were trying to get them to surrender, and the negotiator was kind of telling the tactical guy to give up. Like, why don't we just go home, give up or whatever? And he said, look, to the effect of the American population outnumbers us. And if they win here, then other people are going to think that they can disobey us as well. And so we have to bring down the hammer in effect, and we have to see this through, or the people will rise up. And it's this whole, like what we're saying, this fear tactic. We have to instill fear into the people we rule. We have to use the iron fist, or we won't have society. And I was thinking, man, that I don't know if that was said truly or not, but we see that with our government today. And it's so, to me, it's so different than what a biblically God led nation, where we're obeying because it's obedience to God and not because we necessarily fear the government. And it just, to me, it just sees the consequences of not having God in our nation is that the government then, since they can't appeal to God anymore, they have to appeal to something. And by default, it's authority. And so that's why we see these things, I think, is because we don't have God at the center of our nation anymore. We put him aside. We stop teaching it. And so we see all of our institutions crumble away, resulting or resorting to this force.
Right. Yeah, I think you're spot on. And I think our generation was taught that whatever the government did was for our good. It's almost like the government is this entity not made up of sinful human beings.
Right.
This nameless, faceless force that you are required to obey, and they're here for your good. And questioning that means you're crazy.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I just still even remember as a kid, like, oh, do whatever a doctor says, do whatever the police officer says.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, it's like you treated them like God. Like, oh, they're the perfect, infallible. They're always going to, treat you well, be fair, do justice. And it kind of just carries on for all of us till as adults. Like, oh, yeah, they're the ones that are always going to be right.
Right.
Until they start arresting you for taking communion or something.
Right. Right. All of a sudden, it's like, maybe I should have questioned this.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Hey, AD, what were you going to transition us to?
Oh, well, yeah, I was actually going to save Summer because I happen to know that in the tweet box that we were chatting about this show, we weren't supposed to talk about coronavirus. And here we are, we're 30 minutes in, and all we've done is talk about the Rona. Yeah. What's the deal, man?
I'm sorry. It's my fault. Blame the host.
You can help
it. So there's this great article in 9 Marks by Jonathan Lehman. Why should churches reject governmental guidance?
It's fine, though. It's fine.
What?
It's the same topic, though. Let's go with it, though. I like this.
No. Let's not then. Let's talk about something else. Summer.
No. That's perfect because then I'll do a video on it tomorrow.
I don't even know what to say anymore because of this. But I just
that's what I do on the show. I just derail you.
That's what you do. That's what you do. But I just forget the article for a second. I just don't think it's helpful when we have these kinds of people writing these kinds of blogs, putting out these ideas that we shouldn't question the government, like what we're saying. And I just feel like there's nothing deeper than Romans 13.
Let's talk about this because this is my whole point earlier when I said there's no principles here. So he says, well, as long as the government's making a reasonable argument to save lives, this is Jonathan Lehman of 9 Marks. And he says, determine what a reasonable argument, it's case by case. And it seems to me that stopping a pandemic which kills more than 50,000 U.S. citizens within a month strikes me as pretty reasonable. And to me, it's like, okay, so Jonathan, if I could talk to him, I'd say, okay, so what's your case for 50,000 versus 45,000? And I don't know what he would say, but you could just keep going down in numbers for forever because lives are important, right? This is the level that we're getting. Lives for the economy, lives for the economy. And it's just like, this is not far off from flu death totals. Like, if we cut this number in half, all of a sudden, is the case any more reasonable or less? I mean, I don't know. I mean, that just seems to be like there's a lot of like squish here, and that's the point. We need a lot of meat, and what we're getting from a lot of the leadership is squish, and that's so deadly because now we're all at each other's throats. Like, well, what do you hate people?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's the whole thing.
And how dare you question the government? Unless it's the ultimate, you're going to be martyred, then you should just go with what the government says. And the thing that was just striking to me about this article is in the gray area, the authors, and I think this is kind of like what we're seeing just with Christianity in general in the United States, is whenever there's a gray area and conflict and government wants to assert itself, we just default to submitting to the government.
Woo! Yep. There it is. And why is that?
Why?
Exactly why. And I think too, just to be completely honest with you, and this might not sound, well, it doesn't matter. I'm on the right for this. I think that unless you know that everybody walking into the room is going to die, that you go to church anyway. And I think that if I was 70 years old and had a lung condition for whatever reason, because that's the kind of person this virus kills. If I was 70 years old and had a lung condition, I would still be going to church. Right. Honestly, I would take my chances because the Lord has appointed the day for me. And if I'm going to die, like, it's like, what's the argument? It's like, I'm not going to go to church because it's dangerous. Like, honestly, whether or not there's a virus, like, you going to church should be dangerous in some way, for something. Maybe not to your health, but is that really, like, we're going to decide we don't have to worship God how he said out of fear for our health?
Totally. And the thing is, like, like 3 months ago, we all understood this. Like, I go to a church which is primarily the exact group demographic that this thing kills. Like everyone is over 65, 70. Some people are very sick. And we all understood our responsibilities. Like when my kids were sick, they had a fever, and it's flu season, whatever. We kept that kid home. We said, okay, you don't come to church because you're actually sick. Right. You stay with mom, you stay with dad, or whatever. But the thing is, like, one of us would go. So either I would stay with him or my wife would stay with him. Usually my wife did because she's great. But I would go with the other kids. So it's like, we all got that. And the elderly there, if you would have asked them, were you offended that I was here? They would have said no. Obviously not. You did the right thing. But now all of a sudden, there's this new suspicion, this new sort of like thing that's been introduced, and I don't think that's healthy. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. No.
We all understood how to love our neighbor during flu season every year, and before this.
Right, and it's actually a Christian principle. So the principle of Christianity, the quarantine, that the sick stay away, and that is a way to love your neighbor. And you're welcome, everybody. That's a Christian principle right there.
Right.
You don't quarantine you quarantine the sick, and this has been something people have been doing for like millennia. But all of a sudden, it's a love your neighbor issue. If you don't do that, it's weird.
Well, I don't know about you guys, but I got sick of people saying, "But this thing can be spread asymptomatically." I got sick of it, so I looked it up, and you can have asymptomatic leprosy. Did you know that?
No way.
You absolutely can. It's very unlikely to spread it. Very similar to this one. But you can have it.
Interesting.
You have leprosy right now. I don't know.
You better never go to church again.
Ever. Never
could have it.
No more for me.
You know where that asymptomatic spread came from? It came from this Chinese national that was in, I think it was Italy, somewhere in Europe. And they had contact with 4 people who got it. And the people that were doing the research questioned those 4 people, and the 4 people said that person didn't have symptoms and never questioned the actual person who spread it. They went back to China, and then they found out later, oh, wait, she did have symptoms. The people didn't see them. And so that was the start of the scare of asymptomatic spread.
How do you see symptoms? I don't understand, unless you're coughing, I guess.
Yeah, they didn't see them coughing or sneezing, but they just weren't at that time. And so they published this article, this journal, this medical journal that we're supposed to put our faith. Yes, peer reviewed in the journals that we should bow down and worship to. And they didn't even check the source. That's where that came from.
It was probably one of those questioning sessions that you hear about in the conspiracy theories, Yeah.
That's
probably what. No, she didn't have any symptoms. I promise.
Yeah, definitely.
That's a conspiracy theory.
It is conspiracy theory. And it's, I think he said this, and I don't know what the exact context was, but it's something to the effect of we're being conditioned.
Yeah.
And man, that just started making me think, not just with this, but with so many different things, and just trying to figure out, what am I being conditioned with in our culture? Maybe not even intentionally, what is intentionally? Because it's really weird to me that Christians that are supposed to be taking up our cross, like literally something that's an execution tool, and serving Jesus, and we're scared of getting sick. Like, it just seems weird, and that we're going along with this.
Yeah. No, we're being conditioned for a lot of things. You've been conditioned. I can see that you're probably close in age to me somewhere. You've been conditioned.
I'm 35.
There. Okay, great. So we're 4 years apart. You and I have been conditioned our entire lives to think certain ways about certain things, not just the government or how to be the government, but we've been conditioned how to think about men and women. They've slowly been conditioning us to accept all kinds of just like queer agenda things in our shows and in our movies, and we're being conditioned all the time. I think in the church in particular, I can think of several. I can make like a timeline of books that have been written for the church that have helped us think poorly about gender issues. And it's like with each successive book, it got more and more in your face. But the first book it paved the way, but maybe an undiscerning person or even just one of us not looking for it wouldn't have caught it. And it's just like, it's the slippery slope, and people know that, and they've been using that for a long time. And I think it is absolutely decades of perversion, of weak pulpits, of tolerating all kinds of sins that has brought us to a place where the church is essentially impotent in a lot of ways. The American church is a total mess right now, and we're all at each other's throats.
Yeah, you can even see it with TV, with the sitcoms back in the 90s when we were growing up in high school, and how there was just like certain things that were like, oh, that's outrageous. And you look back at it now and you're like, that wasn't outrageous enough. They're a bunch of old traditional bigots and things like, you just go back, you look at Friends or like The Office. Like Steve Carell even said like that Office would not have been made today from what it was, but there were still things in The Office that were getting you comfortable with conditioning and things that the world wanted you to be comfortable with.
Right.
But now we're too far from that's even like that's so traditional. Like can't talk about that stuff. You said gay instead of whatever the term is nowadays. I don't know.
I think your dad said something that relates to this. It's like, it's not a slippery slope anymore. It's like a cliff. Like last month, things were totally different than they are this month.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Not over the cliff, just flown right over the edge.
I never heard Steve Carell say that, but like The Office wasn't that long ago. Like,
no,
we just jumped off the cliff. Like, you can't do that anymore. That was like 2 years ago. Well, maybe it was longer, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, I got you. It's fine. You're not up on your Office trivia, but we get your point.
Definitely not.
He doesn't even have Netflix.
What a weirdo.
AD, Netflix is this online resource.
That's the thing where you get the DVD in the mail.
Yeah, that's right.
I remember.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Hey, AD, can you show us your Blockbuster card? No, you don't.
It's okay. I 100% still have my. I cannot get rid of it. It's in my wallet, and doesn't make fun of me, but I can't not. I have to do it.
You're going to be able to show your kids that and have to explain.
I know.
Not only what Blockbuster is, but what VCRs are.
I know. That's my plan. I plan on showing them my Blockbuster card.
Oh, you know what? I don't have a Blockbuster card, but I do have a Chuck E. Cheese Play Pass. But I got to tell you, this company is doomed.
They are.
There's no way they're going to survive.
No, not the Corona. No.
Nothing can stop the Corona.
I already didn't want to go in there. So.
All right, so let's move on. I think we did a good, fair covering of the coronavirus. We don't talk about it too much, so
the entire show's over.
What are you talking about? Be positive, AD. You're supposed to be positive today.
That's true. That's true.
Oh my goodness. Our good friend, friend of the show as well, Alex Kochman, quoted the man who cannot be named, or we'll all be labeled Federal Vision. Even us Baptists, apparently.
Could be anybody.
Yeah.
Summer, have they come out after you, Summer, of being Federal Vision?
Yeah, I have the asymptomatic spread, actually. It doesn't have a lot of outward symptoms, but I definitely can make you catch it. So you got to watch out.
Oh my gosh. I don't know if this is a good thing or not, but I haven't seen the Federal Vision hall monitors around Twitter that much. Maybe it's because there's so much worse happening.
Listen. Speaking of that, I usually get left alone by these women, but today, one of them tweeted me and said, and this is funny, Summer, because she said, James White blocked me, so I guess I'll have to make do with the off-brand James White. That's me. And she retweeted like this video I said.
I love her. I don't know who she is, but she's great.
Anyway, but she was trying to obviously she was trying to insult me. But
right. Yeah.
But
she complimented you on that.
I know.
Yeah, that's definitely. And so, but the bizarre part was I couldn't see why she was doing it, because the video she chose to retweet was about how I said that if the government's going to shut down your business, the least they could do is cancel your taxes. Like, very uncontroversial. Like, I didn't get it at all. And so, I mean, I was happy that she retweeted it, but it made no sense to me. Like, there's nothing bad about that. Like, it's just a suggestion.
Vanilla take.
Yeah, and I even in the video, I was so polite. I said, it's the least they could do.
Yeah. It's true.
It is true. AD, your next video, you need to have an ugly sweater on.
Yes.
I actually had in the video. I kind of had an ugly flannel on.
Great.
No, you need to go full sweater vest diary.
I
or
actually
whatever they
do
call
have
it.
an ugly sweater, and it kind of does look like a Kuji, but it's not.
Oh, please wear that next time.
But that's what I said was because a couple people, you know how all the peanut gallery jumps in when one of them activates.
Yeah.
Well,
It's like Power Rangers.
So they all said, yeah, it's so funny. He's the off-brand James White, and I was like, that like I messaged back. I was like, you're too late, because like after my second video, somebody said that to me, and it was a compliment then, and it's a compliment now. Like I know what they were trying to do, but I'm like, why would you? That's not. I mean, say I have a big head or something like that. That might hurt my feelings.
I know. When people like, I've seen people, she's just like her dad. I'm just like, thank you.
Yeah.
I know.
A Federal Vision.
You mean a genius? Thanks.
Federal Vision. Just like your dad. Yeah, you mean a super genius? Yeah.
Oh my god.
That's right.
One of my favorite all-time back and forth with you, Summer, was that one time where we was like, James White is so stupid, and we just had like, oh, that was so good.
So dumb. That guy, I can't believe how dumb he is.
God.
My kids, I don't know if you guys saw, but one time he had a black Hebrew Israelite on his show. And at one point, the black Hebrew Israelite was like, you need to look up what this means in Strong's Concordance or whatever. And my dad was just like, sir, I don't use Strong's Concordance. I teach Hebrew. And my kids are obsessed. And they walk around my house, just in case you guys ever hear my kids, they walk around my house going, I teach Hebrew. It's just like a thing in my house. They don't, but it's, it's reverence for the one that does.
That's crazy. Like, do you not do research on the people you're going to be talking with? Like,
No, a lot of people don't actually. In my experience with my dad's debates, I can't tell you how many times we've been driving home after a debate. He's like, that guy didn't even know that I wrote a book on the subject. So, like, he didn't even know. So that's pretty common, actually.
wow, that's sad.
It is sad.
That is very sad. So I wanted to talk about, I don't know how we got so sidetracked, but Alex Kochman, a friend of the show, he quoted the man who could not, the man who must not be named. That's how we started it. And it's a great quote. I absolutely love it. Desperate times call for faithful men and not for careful men. The careful men come later and write the biographies of the faithful men, lauding them for their courage. Fantastic quote. But what was frustrating and pathetic and sad, all wrapped up in one, was the comments from men and women critiquing it and saying like, oh, the Bible says we should be careful. And they started listing all the places where it talks about being careful and all these things. But what was kind of striking to me is how many women had an opinion about a comment, which I think is pretty much directed at men being courageous. Mm-hmm. And I just feel like that's kind of like why we have such effeminate men, is we have women being authorities on how men should talk to each other and encourage each other. Right. And I wanted to really throw that out to you, Summer, because in our culture today, I would be labeled, a patriarchal person. I hate women and all that stuff.
Scumbag.
A scumbag.
Yeah.
All those things. But what do you think about that, Summer? What do you think about, women coaching up men today?
Yeah, so I think one of the funny things about that is that, so a lot of women do make it their personal priority and objective to essentially tame the men. And there are ways I think that it's proper and right that happens. So obviously, you have the age old, the bachelor, and he's kind of gross and he doesn't really shower enough and he can't clean up after himself. A woman is typically a good influence in that way. Okay. So obviously women, we have quite the effect on men, and that's a good thing in many, many ways. And I think we're all probably fine with that. Obviously, we believe that men and women are brothers and sisters, and we're both necessary in the church, and all of this is such a given. I think what we don't want to talk about is that so many women we essentially despise men for their strengths and then despise them even more when they stop using them for good. So a lot of women essentially want men to be a more masculine version of women, maybe a little bit. And then when men end up being weak and not being able to protect us or build civilization in the way we think because we've essentially castrated them, then we lose all respect for them. And so I think a lot of it has to do, to be completely honest, with public schooling. I think we were raised in public schools to see boys and their strengths as something that was in the way of something better, in the way of education, in the way of growth. And so all of us girls sat there in the classroom, and I think essentially we're taught that alongside with the boys, who were essentially taught that being docile is the only virtue. And so nowadays, when you hear about men needing to be bold and to be brave, you immediately have the Karens of the world show up to let you know that that's ungodly, and that's not how this should go. And we don't even know what meekness is anymore, right? So Jesus was the ultimate man, and he was meek. He also did the hardest thing that's ever been done. So how do you, but there's no like tension there. I'm so sick of the word tension. There's no tension there. That's not a thing. And so I just think we've all turned into Karens. We're afraid of strength. But the worst thing about it for me is that we castrate the men and then we get mad when they're castrated. Like, I feel like I'm saying that word too much. I think
say it all you want.
No, too much.
I think you understand what I'm saying, though.
Yeah. And it's not only that we have the Karens, but we also have the merits in the group, which are the effeminate men that are also like, they have a problem with this quote, and they try to use nuance. AD loves nuance. I hate nuance.
I do love nuance.
I know nuance should exist and there's places for it, but I just do not favor it whatsoever because there's so much wiggle room for the weasels out there who are saying, oh, no, there are times to be careful. We should be careful not to sin. We should be careful to be Christ-like. When obviously it's talking about us being courageous and faithful. That's the word in there, to be faithful. And that these careful men who are not being faithful are going to laud them for their courage later in life. And so they're trying to justify themselves because they're too scared to live a faithful life. And then they try to find this wiggle room. And I think that's one of the things lately in the past couple of months that's been so frustrating to me, seeing on Christian Twitter and Christian publications, is this nuance to wiggle out of things and just not to do the things, they know what's right, and they just don't want to do it for whatever reason. It's really infuriating to me.
Right. Well, and I think it's the same thing with issues, all issues regarding gender, is that at the end of the day, we want to so qualify everything and so exhaust every possible nuance that we don't end up saying anything. And so I think that's part of the feminization of the church, is that it's like, we're not allowed to say act like men, because now we have to qualify that until we're not saying a thing, until you take all the meaning out of it. It's a very postmodern approach to language, the constant qualifications. And that's something I've been thinking about for a long time. I mean, having a weekly show, it's like, I know what my objectors are going to say. Like, I know what their objections are going to be. How much time do I spend caring about that at all? Because you could easily spend an hour nuancing gender to death until essentially we're all androgynous and interchangeable. And I think being faithful means not doing that and allowing scripture to speak how scripture speaks, even though you're going to get a ton of pushback from people who say that they love the Bible.
Yeah, for sure. And we deal with the Karens a lot, but I can imagine it's probably even harder for you as a woman to deal with the Karens of the world. Like, how do you deal with that?
So the good news is that I was raised by somebody who was doing apologetics my whole life. And so I feel like I had a really great example of just do what's right and don't care what people, like if you're doing what's right, you're not doing it to make people happy, you're doing it to glorify God. And so I actually can go the wrong direction. I can care so little what people do that
I'm right there with you.
end up going the wrong way. But I would say too that I also, when I first started doing this show, and I wasn't really used to having people talking about me, I was really thankful when my producer, he was like, "Oh, they created a whole like group just to talk about you," and I was like, "Yeah," because I was in shock that Christians would do this, and he was like, "Great, you're doing something right," and it was like, "Oh, okay." At the end of the day, it's not that you want to wear people's disagreement as a badge, but ultimately it's like no matter what you do, you can't make everyone happy. And if you're being faithful, that's really all that matters. And I really think that the way I've engaged has changed over time as my audience has changed and as I have changed. But at the end of the day, the goal is to be faithful. Nothing I believe doctrinally has changed. I think the world has changed, honestly, since when I started podcasting. I think the world has changed. I think that I have entire groups of people that loved what I was saying 3.5 years ago who hate my guts now. And I'm not saying anything different. My opinion on literally nothing has changed. Our culture has changed a lot. Trump and the Me Too movement and all of that, it really changed the landscape. And so part of, I think, what my job is now is to care even less, but to be even more careful that I'm not qualifying everything I'm saying, but everything I'm saying lines up with God's word, because at the end of the day, that's the only standard that you can live by or stand on in any way that's meaningful, that's not going to change.
Amen to that, for sure. All right, we got questions for you. And first one, we're going to do it to our, we'll put it up on the screen here. This is one of our Patreons. Do you know of any good Christian fiction books for 17-year-old daughter and wife?
Christian fiction. So I have a lot of opinions about Christian fiction. I think a lot of it is really bad. I actually think you're going to end up getting into more trouble in like a Christian fiction bookstore than not, just because what you can find there sometimes is so bad. Obviously, I'm reading N.D. Wilson, I trust. He writes fiction, and I haven't read all of his books, so the ones I've read were really good. So I recommend those. And then
what a federal visionist.
That's the asymptomatic talking right there.
Asymptomatic Fred. No, I am sympathetic to the question, and I'm going to be honest. I really think some of the best fiction out there is not written by Christians.
Yeah, it's
sorry.
It's true. Another question: are you going to the Fight Laugh Feast conference in October, 1st through 3rd?
I haven't been invited, so.
You're invited. You
should okay, am I
invited? Matt, nobody's going to that. We're going to still have coronavirus.
Right.
No, October is when the relapse is going to happen, I guess, right? Isn't it the fall?
Right.
Yeah. That will be our stand. That's when we say enough is enough.
Right.
We're rallying in Tennessee.
We'll just go out in a blaze of glory.
As a bunch of federal visionists.
All be thrown in jail together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That'd be a big mistake for that jail.
Yeah.
Here's a question for you that I'm not sure how you're going to answer, quite honestly. A lot of these I kind of figured how you would answer. Who's your favorite female preacher?
Male preacher.
Pass.
Right? Depends on what you mean by preach.
Don't say AD, please.
Obviously, I don't have a favorite female pastor because there's no such thing. But I love hearing. I will say that there are sisters in my church, and when they go out to the abortion mills and they call out to the women and give them the gospel, it's shocking how strong women can be sometimes. And I would say that's one of the places that you can really see that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. All right, here's one question, which I don't even understand. This one is they want to know what you think about my style on Twitter. Apparently, they think that you don't approve of me on Twitter.
Hold on. Before you answer, Summer, I want you to understand, I don't approve of him on Twitter. So.
That's very true. That's why he never likes or retweets anything of mine. I'm not bitter about that at all.
What is your Twitter style exactly?
I don't know. I have no idea. I thought it was a weird question, honestly.
Earlier, he said that we all have to deal with the Karens, and I'm like, I don't. I'm a nice guy, and I get along with everybody. I'm a positive guy.
Well, now you're lying.
That's why they say you're a knockoff James White, because you get along with everybody and everyone loves you. That's it, right?
There we go. No, I think, and you know what? I think there's a place for. For all kinds of tacts on Twitter. I think sometimes on Twitter, the best route is to be extremely peaceable. And I think sometimes the best thing you can do is throw a bomb. And sometimes you need to throw one. And I think sometimes it's unfaithful not to. I'm so tired of being preached at by TGC types about how to interact on social media. Leave me alone.
Yeah, exactly. I was kind of taken back by that question because I feel like you throw bombs a lot, and I feel like you get in the mix. So that's why I was kind of confused by it. We're definitely not as positive as AD.
No, never. No, who is?
No, I don't know. Yeah. All right. So that is all the questions. AD, you have anything else you want to add, talk about besides the coronavirus?
No, sir. I just want you to know that I'm currently putting up a poll on Twitter.
Oh, gosh.
To see what percentage of people my followers think I get along with on Twitter.
All right, Summer, here's a question for you. Does Joy go on social media while you're recording like AD does?
She has before, but it's not like AD does.
Yeah, I get active notifications while I'm in the middle of talking that AD's posting on Twitter. And I'm like, hey, AD, we're doing a show right now. What are you doing, buddy?
Well,
I got tweets to tweet.
He's like sharing Oprah quotes and inspirational positivity or something.
He doesn't have a smartphone, so he has to get it in sometime.
Right. I got to get it in when I can. Yeah. By the way, just so you know, I did out you, Summer. I said that you admitted that you have asymptomatic federal vision.
I mean, truer words have hardly ever been spoken.
True.
That is true.
So now everybody knows.
Good. I think they already knew, but okay.
Summer, where can people reach you at?
Sheologians.com. I'm at Twitter, Summer Writes, minus the first E. And Facebook, I guess. So the Sheologians page, listen, if you want to get a hold of me, do not message the Sheologians page because that's
not happening.
Or something. Just tweet me. But the Sheologians page, that's it's like the Wild West over there. So yeah, find me on Twitter. That's the best place.
All right. Yeah. Facebook's kind of like a different place for us people on the podcast now. It's like, do we really want to give that out? Does anyone want to be family? Because there's a lot of information. AD has like 2 different pages for himself. I never know which one to tag.
Well, I mean, the Sheologians page on Facebook is insane. It's really hard to keep up with the messages there. I try. But if you really need to get a hold of me, just tweet me. I'll see it eventually.
Yeah. All right. So we'll put those in the show notes. Summer, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. It was fun. I almost talked to AD, but he was too busy tweeting.
You guys are like having a Twitter conversation while we're doing it. Well, thank you everyone for listening. If you have not, consider joining and supporting us on patreon.com/reformgelical. You can find me at How to Build a Tent, find AD at Real AD Robles on the Twitter, and don't forget to check out Summer Writes. We'll put her contact and her show in the show notes for you to follow, and we'll talk to you next time. God bless. You guys didn't say anything at the end.
Oh, bye.
We're wrapping
Like,
up.